in the pursuit of truth and common sense in an unbelievable world. You're listening to the Right Mind podcast with your host, Todd Schowalter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Todd Schowalter, and welcome to Right Mind. Today, my guest is Steve Goldstein. He's a screenwriter, and he's writing a film about the wrestling business, specifically the Von Erichs. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well, Todd.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm excited to hear about the screenplay. Now, the Von Erichs, for those that are kind of new to the new wrestling, you have the UFC and all the mixed martial arts and all that stuff. But back in the day when I was growing up, wrestling was a much different game. And the Von Erichs, they were brothers, weren't they?
Right. It was the father was a champion wrestler, Fritz Von Eric. The real name is Adkisson. So he was. Fritz Von Eric was the dad, and he started out as a heel wrestler with the Nazi gimmick back in the day. He actually worked for Bret Hart's father, Stu Hart, up in Canada. Okay. And Fritz had 6 sons, and three of them became world champions. 5 went into the wrestling business. The first son died tragically at 6, which I get into the curse of the Von Erich family, but they hit the heights and they triumph in tragedy, as the WWE documentary was called. It's really true. They were Fritz was part of World Class Championship Wrestling, WCCW. And at the time, the big 3 was the WWF, the NWA, and the AWA. There was a big 3 in wrestling.
What years were these? What you were talking about?
Well, let's see. Back when I was a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s, you had those 3 major federations. There were a lot of small territorial federations mixed in, but there was a big 3, as they called it. And Fritz Von Erich, who was technically part of the NWA, he had his own world-class championship wrestling, and they were aiming to become a big 4, work their way into the big 3. He actually split from the NWA, and world class looked like it was on its way to being a big 4 as opposed to a big 3. When ESPN gave him a syndicated contract in the 80s, that's when they took off. Before that, the Von Erichs, you got to understand, the Von Erichs in Texas are like the Kennedys in Massachusetts. Really? They're that much ingrained into the culture. Everybody knew about the Von Erichs, but that syndicated contract with ESPN took them national. And they had a really good hour-long weekly show, and it was very innovative for the time. Like Fritz was the first one to use music for entrances. It was really, and a lot of the pyrotechnics. They had good storylines, and they had a family of brothers that were pretty incredible, and they had a lot of non-Erics, as I call them, that they brought in. It was really a top-class promotion. And then bad stuff started happening in 1984.
When you say bad stuff, like what do you mean? David
Von Erich, who was he wasn't the oldest son. He was the second oldest son. David Von Erich, he was an interesting wrestler. He was 6'7".
Wow.
And he had his father's head for booking. So he wasn't just interested in wrestling, which he was great as a wrestler, but he liked to book stuff. They were grooming him to take Ric Flair's championship, the NWA championship. What happened at the time in the early 80s, David was between him and Harley Race, they were winning and losing the Missouri State title back and forth. And the Missouri State title at the time was considered a stepping stone to the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. So he was being groomed. And he won it from Harley. He lost it from Harley. He won it back. Harley is also a former NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And he was going to take the title from Rick. It was getting all set up. But David went on a trip to Japan for a wrestling trip, and Bruiser Brody was there, Chavo Guerrero, a lot of big names. And David died while he was on the trip. And that's when the wheels started coming off the wagon. It took a few years and more deaths, but if you want to chart, exactly where things started going wrong, it was 1984 in Japan. Now, they say David died of a parasitic infection. That's open to debate. Could be drugs. It's a closed world wrestling. Bruiser Brody, who was a monster of a man, carried David Von Erich out of the bathroom where they found him. The autopsy says parasitic infection.
Okay.
Who knows is my answer.
So you have this family, dynasty family, that then seemed to have brought the wrestling as we know it to the forefront. Now, when I was growing up, we're from the same era, it sounds like. I'm from St. Louis. They used to have, it was called Wrestling at the Chase. It was like the Chase Park Plaza Hotel, and it was a big thing on Saturday night. And as you mentioned, the Von Erichs and Harley Race, they were all celebrities here.
Right. So you know about the Missouri State title and everything.
Oh, it was in St. Louis here. It was a big deal. Yeah. Every Saturday night at the Chase, that was a big event, as far as television goes. But it wasn't the magnitude of what it is now. It was almost kind of campy back then, where now it's like pure show business. So I guess where I'm going with this, did the Von Erichs help propel wrestling into the limelight that it is today?
No, that was really all about Vince McMahon, which coincidentally was also 1984 when the Raw wrestling connection. Vince took professional wrestling mainstream, and it became totally different. He started kayfabe was gone by that point. Once they found the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan smoking pot together in a car, and these guys were mortal enemies in the ring, and then you understood kayfabe was broken. And Vince was the first one who said, "Look, it's not sports; it's sports entertainment," and it changed everything. Now, he gobbled up a lot of the territories. They all went under because Vince was New York. He was third generation. His father and grandfather were the heads of the old WWF. And Vince had a different vision. He wanted it with Cyndi Lauper and Lou Albano and music videos and Hulk Hogan, which if Vern Gagne, who was the head of the AWA and had Hulk Hogan, if Vern hadn't been so cheap and had given Hulk a little, like 1% of the T-shirt sales, Hulk might never have left the AWA and gone to the WWF. And that's how history was made. Vince had a vision. Now, I've actually had problems with Vince when I made this film. He tried to come after me, even though he no longer had. He had like a window of 5 years because Kevin Von Erich technically worked for him. But Kevin hated Vince because he blames Vince for Kerry dying. That's another story we can get into. Kerry was the next most famous brother, committed suicide. There were 3 suicides in 6 years in the Von Erich family.
Really?
Yeah, it's just what Fritz wanted to do was build a big 4. He wanted to compete with the 3 big boys. He probably would have ended up going out of business anyways in time because Vince just had he had money and he had a plan. But David Von Erich's death was kind of the domino that set things going downhill. And I can tell you what happened, because David was an incredible wrestler and he had a head for the business. And he was going to be the next champ. So he dies in 84. So what happens, anyways, just to backtrack for a second, Fritz Von Eric, whose real name is Jack Adkisson, he starts out with 6 children. The oldest kid, Jack Adkisson Jr., was electrocuted at 6.5 years old at a trailer park. So he was the name. Yeah. And so if people want to talk about the curse, you can go all the way back to when the oldest son was 6.5 years old. So now there's 5 sons are going to come along after Jack Adkisson Jr. Kevin Von Erich, who is the oldest son, who's still alive. And Kevin's the one I dealt with. And Kevin was a champion. He was a world champion, maybe not as big as David and Kerry, but Kevin won a lot of titles. Kevin married his high school sweetheart. He went home every night, which is probably why he's alive today. The 80s were, cocaine and parties.
Right, sure. Yeah.
And Gary Hart tells some incredible stories. If you know Gary Hart, who used to be a manager, he wrote a book on the family, and it was a crazy time, and the Von Erichs were like rock stars in Texas, and ESPN was taking them national, and unfortunately David dies. So then what happens after that, I got to get there's so many deaths in the family. It's ridiculous. So we've got
Were these
Jack.
all then closely as far as the timing goes? And you said within 6 years?
Well, other than the oldest son dying at 6.5, everything is pretty close. The suicides were 3 of them in 6 years.
Wow.
So what happened was your big 3 were David when he was alive, Kevin, and Kerry Von Erich. Kerry was the muscle man of the group who later went to the WWF as a Texas Tornado. Because Vince totally erases your name in history when you go to his organization. That's part of what he does. So anyways, the next brother to die was Mike Von Erich, and Mike was the 4th brother. And Mike was probably pushed a little too quickly. His first big bout was a 10-minute draw against Ric Flair on television, and that kind of pushed him really fast. But Mike was definitely the 4th best brother. Kevin says Mike had a lot of talent, but we don't know because Mike was dead at 23, I believe. He went to Israel on a tour. Yeah, by the way, I think every time these guys go on a tour out of the country is when you should cross your fingers. So Mike's in Israel, and he gets toxic shock syndrome, which I wasn't aware wasn't aware guys even could get toxic shock.
Yeah, I thought it was a female thing, right?
Yeah, that's what we all think, but I guess he got it somehow in Israel. So anyways, the doctor who treated him, quiet puppy, sorry, I got a dog going there.
That's
the
all right.
doctor who treated him, a Jewish doctor, and I knew his wife because I was like the only Jew in this whole really born again Christian world of Von Erichs when they brought me in to write the script. So I met the Jewish doctor and his wife, and he treated Mike, and he got Mike better. But Mike ended up ODing on alcohol and a bunch of drugs. They found his body 4 days later down by the lake in Texas. My feeling is the pressure was too much on Mike. He wasn't going to live up to the other 3. He could have, but, there's a lot going on. David was dead. They were a very religious born-again family. They really had this idea that once you die, you see your brother on the other side immediately. That's great, but I'd love to see my parents one day, but I'm in no rush, Todd.
I hear you, yeah.
I'm not taking any chances. So Mike's dead on suicide, and that's the first suicide now. I forget what year that was, but Kerry Von Erich, they pushed him to be the champ. Kerry actually won the title from Ric Flair. Held it for 3 weeks, gave it back. Reason for that, as Kevin explained to me, when you're the champ like Ric Flair, you got to be available 6-7 nights a week. You don't miss any dates. You have to be friggin' reliable. Kerry, nice guy, give you the shirt off his back, not the most reliable guy in the world, okay? Big muscleman guy, loved everybody. I know a lot of strange stories about Kerry with women and stuff, so he probably missed a few dates. So they let him hold it for 3 weeks, the title, because, it should have been David's title, but David's dead. So Kerry holds the title. Then he's not the champ anymore. People start dying and they're not just Von Erichs dying. They're non-Erichs. Bruiser Brody gets stabbed in Puerto Rico by Jose Gonzalez at a card for Carlos Colon. Nobody was ever convicted of that. He was a big part of world-class championship wrestling. Chris Von Erich, not Chris Von Erich, he comes later. Chris Adams, Chris Adams, one of my favorites, was part of world class. He gets into a barroom fight with a friend. He gets shot to death. Okay, there were Gino Hernandez, who was really a good wrestler with Chris Adams as part of the dynamic duo. Cocaine overdose. I could go on. But anyways,
this is all during the 80s.
This is all during the 80s, and the 80s were the cocaine era, and everybody's dying. So now you got all these people dead, but Fritz is still pushing the organization, and some people say, Fritz was demanding. Kevin says it wasn't Fritz's fault, but he loved his father. Kerry Von Erich gets into a motorcycle accident, loses half his right foot in the motorcycle accident. Does that stop him? No. They put a prosthetic on the half of right foot. He's still wrestling. He showers with his boots on, so nobody in the locker room can see that he's missing half a foot. There's a match. I've seen it. You can sometimes find it on YouTube where Kerry's battling Colonel DeBeers. If you know who Colonel DeBeers is, used to wrestle.
Not offhand. No.
Anyways, Colonel DeBeers accidentally pulls off Kerry's prosthetic right in the ring.
Oh, wow.
And the shocked look on Colonel DeBeers' face is like, what the heck just happened?
Right.
So Kerry grabs the foot back from DeBeers, rolls himself under the ring, reattaches the prosthetic, then goes back into the ring and pins DeBeers. It was just a big secret trying to keep that half a foot private from everybody because he was in a lot of pain. He got hooked on painkillers. Obviously, you got half a foot from a motorcycle accident. Your father pushes you back into the ring. You're trying to keep the promotion alive. He got hooked on painkillers. He got arrested, Kerry. He was on probation, but he was going to probably go to jail for a couple of years. Minimum security in Texas where he'd be a celebrity, but his marriage was breaking up. He was getting divorced. And he went home, called Kevin, then sat on his porch, put a shotgun to his chest, and blew the trigger. So, Kerry.
Wow. So I mean, it's like, so you're this is a documentary that you're doing, obviously. So I
did a feature. There've been two very good documentaries done by one by the WWF, maybe two. And when my late partner approached me and she goes, "We're going to do a documentary," I said, "No." I said, "This is like there've been two documentaries." I said, "This is like Shakespearean stuff."
It is actually. That's why I was asking. So,
there aren't a lot of. Every wrestler thinks they have a great feature film, which isn't true. Like nobody wants to. People talk about the Chris Benoit story, but nobody really wants to touch that because, you kill your wife and kid. It's kind of tough to make a movie out of a guy like that.
Right.
Maybe
Rick
Rick
brought up an interesting term earlier, like with Vince McMahon. You said sports entertainment, which it definitely is at this point. I mean, even back, in the early days, is a lot of this, because I don't know. My son's a big high school wrestler, so I know the wrestling a lot. But is a lot of the professional wrestling, is it scripted? Is it natural? I mean, how does that all work? I mean,
it's all. They don't use the word fake. I have a good buddy in Tulsa when I was there, Steve Cox, who kind of brought me in a little bit, and he said it's like the red curtain. We don't show you what's behind the red curtain.
Mm-hmm.
We're like the mafia unless we trust you. And he goes, as far as we're concerned, there are the boys, which are the wrestlers, and there are the marks, which is everybody else. We're all marks. And I says, "What am I, Steve?" And he goes, "Well, you're a writer, so we kind of give you a little special place here." But he goes, "We don't use the word fake." He goes, it's pre-scripted. Everything is pre-scripted. Everything is pre-choreographed. Now, do things go wrong in the ring and people get hurt or even die? Yeah, sure. Are some of these guys great athletes? Yeah, some of these guys are great athletes. There's a difference between a great wrestler and a great performer.
Mm-hmm.
Ric Flair is a great performer. Bob Backlund was a great wrestler. And there's a difference. Now when these wrestlers settle some grudges for real, because like every other business, they don't like each other, it's called shooting. So when a wrestler shoots on you, which they're not supposed to do, they can hurt you. Jack Briscoe, one of the greatest wrestlers and former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, he was a shooter. He could hurt you. Backlund could hurt you. Bruiser Brody was just a monster. He could hurt you. All of Fritz Von Erich's kids knew how to shoot, so they could hurt you. A lot of the guys today that you see on WWE and everything, they're performers.
Right.
They're not. They could hurt you because they're big and they're in shape, but they don't know like how to break your arm. Like when Hulk Hogan was being trained to become a wrestler, they sent him to Japan to work with Hiro Matsuda. And Hiro Matsuda was a wrestler who was a trainer, but the first thing Hiro did was break Hogan's leg to let him know this wasn't a game.
Right.
And Hiro Matsuda was like half the size of Hulk Hogan. So if you know what you're doing, you can, like my buddy Steve Cox showed me something with the thumb. He goes, you can disable a big guy by taking their thumb and bending it back. He goes, the thumb won't bend back. So these guys know how to work your limbs and things. Bret Hart, the Hart family, they were shooters. Stu Hart used to train them in the dungeon. And the dungeon was like, if you survived it, maybe you'd become a wrestler. But a lot of these guys cry uncle and they give up because, it's for real. But I watch a lot of guys today. There aren't a lot of shooters anymore because that's kind of a dying art. And nobody wants to get hurt. Everybody just wants to make money.
Right.
But
it's more like entertainment. It's
right. But they have some fights with each other. Like Scott Steiner went after Hulk Hogan a few years ago, and it wasn't a joke, And Scott Steiner's a little nutty.
But do they have, like, say, even nowadays? I mean, do they have almost like a season where it's scripted, like they already know who's going to?
Yeah. What happens is they. You know the outcome of the match and how long the match should go. Okay. And in between those two things, you have a lot of leeway. So if you have a 10-minute match and Daniel Bryan is supposed to win, you've got a lot. If guys really know what they're doing, it becomes like real free form, like dancing in there.
Right,
but,
sure.
Yeah, but when you see them clinch up there, they're giving instructions to each other, like, okay, I'm going to fling you across the rope. You're going to duck the clothesline. I'm going to body slam you. I'm going to fly out of the ring, after that. So they're giving instructions. The best wrestlers know how to call a match. Wrestlers love to work with other wrestlers who know how to call a match. Now, there are some wrestlers who have a bad reputation who are called stiff in the ring. You don't want to be stiff in the ring. Guys like Stan Hansen, who had a bad eye, he was stiff in the ring. He broke Bruno Sammartino's neck in 1976 because he was stiff in the ring. Luckily,
what do you mean stiff? Like he just didn't do anything, or what?
Stiff, like, you're supposed to, when you're stiff, you're supposed to be very flexible in the ring. It's supposed to look, it's like Eddie Mansfield. He did an expose on everything. It's like, when you body slam a wrestler, if you look at it real closely, their back isn't hitting the mat first. Their legs are hitting the mat, the heels of their feet. So that's taking the brunt. When they do a pile driver, like The Undertaker, the head of the other wrestler isn't hitting the ring. It's being cradled in the lap. Now, Marty Jannetty did a power bomb wrong and actually broke his opponent's neck. So it's very important that both wrestlers aren't stiff and that they're flexible and they know exactly how to make it look real. I mean, when it all works right, it's amazing.
Well, it's like good stuntmen and things like that. With all choreographed.
I see some of these guys go flying out of the ring through a table, and those tables aren't like oak tables that could kill you, but it's not easy to do that. I mean, I see some things I still don't understand.
Well, no, it's impressive. Like you said, you have to be athletic, you have to be graceful. I mean, you can't just be some. That's why I think the main misconception is, now one of the things I don't understand is that you do have some people that are fans, audience members that insist, no, this is all happening in real time, this is all natural, this is all and so I mean, it's neat to hear you say and kind of explain it, because I don't think that takes anything away from it. I mean, if anything, that shows you really have to be on your game and talented and choreograph and it's almost like being a dancer or something like that.
And to be honest, these guys are pretty tough because they're very tough. Because you take somebody like the Iron Sheik, who's a real character, and he was actually an Iranian Olympic wrestler under the Shah. So the Iron Sheik is backstage in the dressing room with Bruno Sammartino, and Bruno's already in his 60s by now, but he's visiting. So 6 NFL players walk into the back of the room. They probably had a VIP pass, and they start screwing around with the Iron Sheik and Bruno that you guys aren't that tough. And these are 6, NFL football players. So story goes, the Iron Sheik and an older Bruno pretty much kicked their tuckuses for these 6 guys, because you grab the wrist, you grab a finger, the limbs. These football players didn't know what hit them. It's not just about punching. So these guys are very tough. Ken Patera, who was an Olympic gold medalist for weightlifting, and Mr. Saito, who was also an Olympic medalist for Japan, they got arrested. They went into McDonald's. They weren't happy with the drive-through. Took 20 cops to subdue them and arrest them. I mean, these guys were cleaning house. They're very strong guys, but but when they're in the ring with each other, they don't hurt each other, and they try. And a lot of them are really nice guys. A lot of them are religious. A lot of them, but they're like really strong, and they've learned. Some of them have learned how to shoot from the old time wrestlers, and they have tempers. So if they're in a situation where they don't feel comfortable, they will resort to hurting you.
Well, I think that's like anything. You see that in regular mainstream, whether it's hockey, football, things like that. Well, that's really fascinating. So we're about ready. We got about 2 minutes left. I mean, how can we get, is your film out? What is the time?
What happened was, I wrote it a few years ago, and I had a partner on the film, Lisa Renee Andrews. And long story short, didn't really trust Lisa, because that's the thing with Facebook. You make it's a double-edged sword. Make a lot of nice.
Oh, no, everything's real on Facebook, Steve.
Yeah, everything's real on Facebook. So, anyways, Lisa ended up getting murdered. Lisa got murdered after I already set up the financing and everything.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, it was a hotel on the bad side of Dallas, trunk of her son's car, Mustang. Son didn't do it. It's an unsolved murder. We think it was drug cartel, but the film stopped after that. I had it's my script. I have an entertainment attorney in Los Angeles. We'd like to do it still. Kevin's kind of a strange guy. He's taken 35 concussions. He's bitter about a lot of stuff. People talk about a Von Erich curse. Because the other brother, Chris Von Eric, committed suicide also. He was like the runt of the litter after Kerry. So that's 3 suicides. Kevin survived. He's got 2 sons in the business, which, I hope he's keeping an eye on them. I want to get the movie. I want to get it made because, like I said, there aren't a lot of great wrestling stories, but you've got a dad who was a world champion. You got 6 sons, no daughters, by the way. Kerry had a daughter who used to wrestle, Lacey Von Eric. And 3 of those sons became world champions. And and then it all went to hell in the 80s. They hit the heights, and my buddy Steve Cox in Tulsa would help me cast it because I need like a professional wrestler to, but we're working on it. And
it sounds like it would make a great limited series or something like that. Yeah. Like a Netflix type thing for like.
Well, Von Erich fans are strange. They're kind of like Deadhead fans. They live in the 80s,
right?
And all they do is talk about like there's no wrestling since 1984 when David died. Yeah. And it's a little strange. Like I had a page on Facebook. I goosed it up to 52,000 people, which was crazy. Yeah. And they were all just like, they're kind of, they want it's almost like they talk about the curse being completed when Kevin dies. And I say, Kevin's fine. He's in Hawaii. He married his high school sweetheart. He's got 4 children. 2 are in the business. Wish him well. He's had a lot of concussions. He's a little out of it and bitter sometimes, but he's a nice enough guy. And stop talking about dead Von Erichs. We've had enough dead Von Erichs, but it's just, as a writer, it's a great story.
It sounds fascinating. It really would make a great film or series.
It would be. It's just knowing Kevin personally, I feel, but he told me he wants to tell the whole story. So, and then I also deal with that, the religious stuff because, I feel like an outsider with that. It's just, they come at you from a different place and they respect me because I write, but I always feel like, geez, I don't know. You guys really feel like you blow your head off and then the door opens and you see a dead brother on the other side.
Like you said, I don't think that's worth, just checking out right away. We'll just wait till that, naturally. Yeah.
No rush. Come
no rush whatsoever. Because I still owe a few of my dead relatives money, and I'm pretty sure that they would hit me up for that right away.
Well, maybe money no longer counts. We're hoping.
I hope no. Well, Steve, you've been a blast having on. I tell you what, it's really been a thrill, and the stories. We could probably talk for hours about, but I wish you all the best with it, and I can't wait to see it hit the screen, whether it's streaming or in the cinema or whatnot. But thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Todd, and it was fun, and you can post a link on my page if you want.
We will. What we'll do, we'll put links up on the screen here, and then we'll also attach them to all the descriptions in both the video and audio versions, so people will be able to see or get a hold of you. And again, thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, you're welcome. You have a good day, Todd. Thank you.
All right, you too. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm Todd Schowalter, and you've been either watching or listening to Right Mind. And remember, if you don't have a right mind, you don't have a mind at all. Till next time, bye-bye.
This has been the Right Mind Podcast with Todd Schowalter.